The fake badge gleamed under the streetlight as Karen stuffed the crumpled 20s into her jacket pocket, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd perfected the authoritative voice, the stern expression, the way real cops carried themselves when they meant business. But as she turned to walk away from her latest victim, red and blue lights suddenly painted the alley walls, and a voice behind her called out, "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." Karen's blood turned to ice. The real police had arrived, and her elaborate charade was about to unravel in the most spectacular way possible. Karen Blackwood adjusted the cheap police badge she'd bought online, checking her reflection in the cracked mirror of the gas station bathroom. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across her angular face. At 43, she'd mastered the art of looking official stern jawline, hair pulled back in a tight bun, shoulders squared with manufactured authority. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, straightening the navy blazer she'd picked up at Goodwill. It wasn't regulation, but most people wouldn't know the difference. Most people saw a badge and immediately submitted to authority. The bathroom door squeaked as she pushed it open, stepping into the humid Dallas evening. Her beat-up Honda Civic sat under the harsh glow of the parking lot lights, but tonight it would serve as her patrol car. She'd already applied the magnetic signs she'd had printed at Kinko's, Dallas Police Department, in official-looking letters. From a distance, in the dark, it was convincing enough. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. Rent was due 3 days ago. Pay up or get out. She deleted it without responding. By tomorrow night, she'd have enough money to cover rent, and then some. She just had to stick to the plan. The first target was already in her sights, a young couple arguing outside a 24 diner on Elm Street. Perfect. Domestic disputes always made people nervous, eager to avoid police involvement. She pulled up slowly, activating the flashlight app on her phone and shining it through the passenger window. "Excuse me," Karen called out, her voice carrying the practiced authority she'd been perfecting for weeks. "Is there a problem here?" The cupola girl, who couldn't be more than 22, and a guy about the same age, immediately separated. The girl's mascara was smudged, tears still fresh on her cheeks. The guy looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "No problem, officer," the guy said quickly, his hands automatically moving to his pockets before stopping himself. "Just a misunderstanding." Karen stepped out of her car, the fake badge prominent on her chest. She'd practiced this moment dozens of times in her apartment, studying YouTube videos of real police interactions. The key was confidence. People expected cops to be in control, to know what they were doing. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Karen asked the girl, who was now wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm fine," the girl said, but her voice cracked. "We were just ... we had a fight about money." "Money troubles can be stressful," Karen said, nodding sympathetically. "But arguments in public can escalate quickly. I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you." The couple exchanged glances. This was the moment of truth. Karen held her breath, waiting to see if they would comply or call her. "Bluff, of course," the guy said, reaching for his wallet. "I'm sorry, officer, we didn't mean to cause any trouble." As they handed over their licenses, Karen felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. She was in control now. She pretended to examine the IDs, noting their names Michael Chen and Jessica Rodriguez B for handing them back. "Here's the thing," Karen said, lowering her voice to a more conversational tone. "I could write you both up for disturbing the peace. Public arguments, especially loud ones, can result in citations. But I'm not looking to ruin anyone's night." She paused, letting the weight of potential consequences sink in. Both kids looked terrified now, exactly where she wanted them. "However," Karen continued, "the department has been cracking down on these types of incidents. There's a new community service fee that helps fund conflict resolution programs. It's a way to handle these situations without formal charges." "Fee?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. $200, Karen said matter-of-factly, "split between the two of you. Consider it an investment in your relationship and your clean records." Michael's face went pale. "Officer, we don't have that kind of money. That's actually what we were fighting about. Jessica lost her job last week, and we're behind on everything." Perfect. Desperation made people compliant. Karen had learned that the hard way during her own financial struggles. She'd lost her job at the insurance company 6 months ago, burned through her savings, and now she was facing eviction. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, she'd found a solution. If the system had failed her, she'd work outside the system. "I understand money is tight," Karen said, her voice softening slightly, "but I have to follow protocol. Tell you what, Ty, can accept a partial payment tonight. Whatever you have on you, the rest can be paid at the station within 48 hours. She was lying, of course. There was no protocol, no station to report to, no follow-up. By the time they figured out they'd been scammed, she'd have moved on to the next mark. Jessica looked at Michael, who was already reaching for his wallet. "Again, I've got about $60, he said reluctantly. "And I have 40 in my purse," Jessica added, digging through her handbag. Karen nodded approvingly. "That's a good start. That shows you're taking this seriously. The balance can be handled later." As they handed over the crumpled bills, Karen felt a mixture of satisfaction and guilt. These were good kids, probably working minimum-wage jobs, trying to make ends meet, just like she was. But sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had her own survival to worry about. "Thank you for your cooperation," Karen said, pocketing the money. "You'll receive a receipt and further instructions via mail within the next few days." Another lie, but they didn't need to know that. "Now, I suggest you both head home and talk through your issues calmly," she continued. "Arguments in public reflect poorly on everyone involved." The couple nodded eagerly, grateful to be escaping what they believed was a much worse fate. They climbed into their battered Toyota and drove away quickly, leaving Karen alone in the parking lot with $100 in her pocket and a growing sense of confidence. One down, she thought. Several more to go. As she got back into her car, Karen's phone buzzed with another text, this time from her credit card company. "Payment overdue. Please contact us immediately." She smiled grimly and deleted that message. By the end of the night, all her problems would be solved. She just had to stick to the plan and avoid any real cops. How hard could that be? She pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward her next target area, the nightclub district where drunk college students with disposable income would be easy pickings. But as she drove, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced in her rearview mirror and saw only empty road behind her. Still, something felt different about tonight. The air seemed charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Karen gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed. Down on the accelerator, there would be no turning back now. The bass from Club Vertigo thumped through the brick walls as Karen circled the block for the third time. Studying the scene, groups of college students stumbled between bars, their laughter echoing off the narrow streets. Perfect hunting ground. Young, drunk, carrying cash, and terrified of getting in trouble with the law. She spotted her next targets outside a trendy cocktail bar, three guys in their early 20s. Clearly intoxicated, arguing loudly about splitting an Uber. One of them had pulled out a thick wad of bills, waving it around as he complained about always having to pay for everything. Karen's pulse quickened. This could be her biggest score yet. She parked across the street and activated her emergency flashers, then approached the group with purposeful strides. The fake badge caught the neon light from the bar's sign, gleaming with manufactured authority. "Gentlemen," she called out, her voice cutting through their drunken banter. "I need to speak with you." The three guys turned, their expressions immediately sobering. The one with the mania kid, wearing an expensive-looking polo shirt, quickly stuffed the bills back into his pocket. "Is there a problem, officer?" Polo Shirt asked, trying to stand straighter and failing. "Public intoxication is a serious offense in this district," Karen said, pulling out a small notebook she'd bought at the dollar store, "especially when it involves disorderly conduct." "We weren't being disorderly," protested the second guy, a lanky kid with bleached hair. "We were just trying to get a ride." "Son, I've been watching you for the past 10 minutes, Karen lied smoothly. Loud arguments, stumbling into the street, disturbing other pedestrians. That constitutes disorderly conduct under city ordinance 14-7. The third member of the group, a heavy-set kid who looked like he might throw up at any moment, swayed on his feet. "Officer, please, we're just trying to get home. We don't want any trouble." Karen nodded, as if considering their situation carefully. "Here's what I can do. The standard fine for public intoxication is $500 per person. That's $1,500 total." The color drained from Polo Shirt's face. "$1,500. We don't have that kind of money. However, Karen continued, the department has a new citation diversion program. Instead of formal charges in court, appearances, you can pay a reduced fine directly to me tonight. Consider it community service. How much? Bleached hair asked nervously. 300, total, split between the three of you. It was more than she'd asked for from the couple. But these kids clearly had money. Polo shirts, watch alone, probably cost more than she made in a month at her old job. The three friends huddled together, whispering frantically. Karen could see the calculation in their eyes. $300 versus potential arrest, court, dates, and parents finding out. It was an easy choice. Okay, Polo Shirt said finally, we'll pay the fine. As they pooled their money, Karen felt a familiar rush of power. She was saving these kids from themselves. Really. A night in jail would be far worse than losing a few $100s their parents probably gave them anyway. But as Polo Shirt counted out the bills, Karen noticed something that made her stomach drop. A marked police cruiser was slowly making its way down the street, its headlights sweeping across the sidewalk. Here's your money, officer, Polo Shirt said, extending the cash toward her. Karen's mind raced. The real cop car was still 2 blocks away, but moving in their direction, she had maybe 90 seconds before it reached them. Thank you for your cooperation, she said quickly, snatching the money and stuffing it into her jacket. You're free to go. Get that Uber and head straight home. The three guys nodded eagerly and immediately started fumbling with their phones to call a ride. Karen turned and walked briskly toward her car, trying not to look like she was fleeing, but every step felt like an eternity, and she could hear the police cruiser getting closer. She reached her Honda and slid behind the wheel just as the real patrol car turned onto their street. Through her rearview mirror, she watched as it slowed. Near the 3 college students who were now standing quietly by the curb waiting for their ride, Karen held her breath. If the real officer decided to question the kids about what had just happened, the patrol car idled for a moment, then continued down the street without stopping. Karen exhaled sharply, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. That had been too close. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number. Hello, she answered cautiously. Is this Officer Martinez with the Dallas PD? The voice was male, middle-aged, and agitated. Karen's blood turned cold. She'd never claimed to be Officer Martinez. She'd never given any of her marks a fake name. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong number, she said, her voice barely steady. No, I don't think I do. My son and his girlfriend were approached by a female officer about an hour ago outside Murphy's Diner. She collected $100 for some bogus community service fee. When they got home and told me about it, I called the actual Dallas PD. They don't have any Officer Martinez, and they certainly don't collect fees on the street. Karen's heart hammered against her ribs. Michael and Jessica had gone home and told someone. Of course they had. Sir, I think there's been some misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is that you thought you could scam my kid and get away with it. The man's voice was rising. I've already filed a report with the police. They're very interested in talking. To the woman who's been impersonating an officer in their jurisdiction, the line went dead. Karen stared at her phone, her mind reeling. How had he gotten her number? She'd never given it to anyone, unless she thought back to her interaction with Michael and Jessica. Had she said something? Made some mistake that led them back to her? A new text message popped up on her screen, this one from a number she didn't recognize. We know who you are. The police are looking for you. Then another. You picked the wrong family to mess with. And another. Enjoy jail. Karen's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Someone was tracking her, threatening her, but who and how? She looked around frantically, suddenly paranoid that she was being watched. The street seemed darker now, full of shadows and potential threats. Every parked car could contain someone waiting for her. Every passing pedestrian could be an undercover cop. She needed to get home, pack her things, and figure out her next move. Maybe leave Dallas entirely, start over somewhere else where no one knew her face. But as she started the engine, Karen realized with growing horror that she'd made a fundamental error in her planning. She'd been so focused on the con itself that she'd never considered what would happen if someone decided to fight back. And now, someone was fighting back with resources she didn't have and connections she couldn't match. Her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number. It was her landlord. Karen, you need to get over here right now. His voice was tense, urgent. There are police officers at your apartment building asking questions about you. They want to know if you're impersonating law enforcement? The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the car floor. This wasn't just about getting caught anymore. This was about her entire life crumbling around her in real time. Karen sat in her idling car on a dark Dallas street, $400 richer, but with nowhere left to run. The hunter had become the hunted, and she was starting to realize that her victims might not be as helpless as she'd assumed. Karen's hands shook as she picked up her phone from the car floor. 3 missed calls from her landlord, 2 from unknown numbers, and a string of text messages that made her stomach churn. She scrolled through them with growing dread. The police have your license plate number. Building manager is giving them access to your apartment. Should have thought twice before messing with the wrong people. The last message included a photo that made her blood freeze her own driver's license. Photo pulled from some database and circulated like a wanted poster. Below it, someone had typed Karen Blackwood, fake cop. Spread the word. How had they gotten her information so quickly? Her mind raced back through the evening's events, searching for the mistake that had exposed her. Then it hit her like a physical Blotha parking lot security camera at the diner. Michael and Jessica's father must have gone there, gotten the footage, traced her license plate. She'd been so careful about everything else, but she'd parked right under a security camera like an amateur. Her phone rang again. This time, it was a number she recognized, her sister Beth, calling from Houston. Karen, what the hell is going on? Beth's voice was sharp with concern. I just got a call from some man saying you're impersonating police officers and stealing money from people. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake. Karen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her sister's disappointment, even through the phone. Beth was the successful one, the one who'd gone to college and become a nurse, who owned a house and had a retirement account, the one who'd offered to help Karen financially months ago, an offer Karen had been too proud to accept. Beth, I can explain, can you? Because this man, Michael's father, he said you took $100 from his son and some girl pretending to be a cop. He said there might be other victims. It's not what you think. What I think is that my sister has lost her mind. Beth's voice cracked with emotion. Karen, they're saying you could go to prison for this. Impersonating a police officer is a felony, and theft, fraud. Jesus, what were you thinking? Karen wanted to explain about the eviction notice, about the bills piling up, about the months of rejections from every job she'd applied for. She wanted to tell Beth about the nights she'd lain awake, calculating how long she could stretch a can of soup, about the humiliation of having her credit cards declined at the grocery store, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down, she knew there was no explanation that would make this right. I need help, she whispered instead. Where are you now? I don't know. Some street downtown. Beth, they're at my apartment. The police are at my apartment. Listen to me carefully, Beth said, her voice shifting into the calm, professional tone she used with panicked patience. You need to turn yourself in tonight, before this gets any worse. I can't go to jail, Beth. Can't. You're going to jail anyway if you keep running. But if you turn yourself in, get a lawyer. Maybe we can work something out. Plea bargain? Restitution? I don't know. But running will only make it worse. A new text popped up on Karen's screen while Beth was talking. Police are canvassing the club district. They have your photo. Turn yourself in before we find you. The message was from an unknown number, but something about the tone made Karen think it might actually be from a real police officer. They were closing in, and her window of opportunity was shrinking by the minute. Beth, I'm scared, she admitted. I know, honey, but you're not alone. I'm already in my car driving up from Houston. I'll meet you at the police station. We'll figure this out together. Karen felt tears streaming down her face. After months of isolation, a feeling like she was drowning alone, her sister was coming to help. It was more than she deserved. What station? Karen asked. The downtown Dallas PD. Do you know where that is? I think so. Karen, promise me you'll go straight there. Don't stop, don't try to run, don't do anything else stupid. Just drive to the police station and wait for me. Okay, Karen said, though every instinct in her body was screaming at her to floor the accelerator and drive until she ran out of gas. Beth. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are. We'll get through this." Karen hung up and sat in the silence of her car, feeling the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a physical force. $400 in stolen money sat in her jacket pocket, not enough to solve her problems, but enough to destroy her life. She was about to start the engine when a knock on her passenger window made her jump. A young woman stood outside, cell phone in hand, pointing it directly at Karen's face. "Are you Karen Blackwood?" the woman asked through the glass. Karen's heart hammered. "Who wants to know?" "I'm Jessica Rodriguez. You stole money from me and my boyfriend tonight, pretending to be a police officer. The girl from the diner." Karen's mind raced. How had she found her? How had she known where to look? "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen said, but her voice came out weak and unconvincing. "My dad hired a private investigator," Jessica said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "He traced your license plate from the security footage. We've been driving around looking for you for the past hour." Karen noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A second car had pulled up behind hers, blocking her in. Through the windshield, she could see an older man behind. The wheel, his phone pressed to his ear. "My dad's calling the police right now," Jessica continued. "They'll be here in a few minutes. You can wait, or you can give us back our money, and maybe we can work something out." Karen looked at the girl's face through the window, young, frightened, but determined. "I was going to turn myself in anyway," Karen said, rolling down the window slightly. "Sure you were," Jessica replied, but her tone was more sad than angry. "Look, I know you're probably in a bad situation. People don't usually do this kind of thing unless they're desperate. But you picked the wrong people to mess with." Karen reached into her jacket and pulled out the crumpled bills, the $100 she'd taken from Jessica and Michael, mixed with the $300 from the college students. She handed it all through the window. "This is more than I took." "From you," she said quietly. Jessica counted the money, then looked back at Karen with confusion. Where did the rest come from? Other people tonight? Jesus. Jessica stared at her for a long moment. "How many people did you do this to?" "Tonight. Just you and 3 others. But I was planning to keep going." The sound of sirens began to echo off the downtown buildings, growing louder with each passing second. Red and blue lights appeared at the far end of the street, moving toward them with purpose. "My sister's meeting me at the police station," Karen said, more to herself than to Jessica. "She's driving up from Houston." "That's good," Jessica said, and she sounded like she meant it. Everyone needs someone in their corner. The police cars were getting closer now, their lights painting the buildings in alternating colors. Karen could see at least 3 vehicles, maybe more. They weren't taking any chances. "For what it's worth," Jessica said, stepping back from the car, "I hope you get the help you need." Karen looked at the young woman, really looked at her for the first time. She was probably working some minimum wage job, probably struggling with her own bills and problems, but she'd found the strength to fight back against someone who'd wronged her. There was something admirable in that, something Karen wished she could have found in herself before it came to this. "Thank you," Karen said, "and I really am sorry." The first police car pulled up beside them, its spotlight flooding car with blinding white light. Through the glare, she could see officers stepping out, hands resting on their weapons, approaching with the careful caution of people who'd been trained to expect the unexpected. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands visible," a voice called through a megaphone. Karen took a deep breath, opened her car door, and stepped into the bright light, her hands raised high above her head. After months of pretending to be someone else, she was finally ready to face who she really was. The handcuffs were tighter than Karen had expected. She sat in the back of the patrol car, her wrists aching. Watching the familiar streets of Dallas blur past through the reinforced window, Officer Martinez, the real Officer Martinez, sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at her with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. "You know," Martinez said, breaking the silence, "I've been a cop for 15 years, and I've never had someone steal my name before. That's a new one." Karen said nothing. What was there to say? That she'd picked the name randomly, that she'd never intended for it to go this far. "You put a lot of work into this. Could have put that same energy into finding a legitimate job." "I tried," Karen said. Quietly, for months, "I tried." "Yeah, well, lots of people are out of work." Its concrete facade looking like a fortress under the streetlights. Karen had driven past this building dozens of times in her life, never imagining she'd be arriving in handcuffs. Inside, the booking process was a blur of fluorescent lights, fingerprints, and mugshots. Karen's personal effects were cataloged and stored: her fake badge, the magnetic car signs, her phone, and the remaining money from her cons. The desk sergeant, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, processed the paperwork with efficient indifference. Impersonating a peace officer, theft by deception, fraud, the sergeant read off the charges. Karen was led to a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The concrete walls were painted institutional, green, and a single fluorescent bulb hummed overhead. She wasn't alone. A woman in her 20s sat on the opposite bench, clearly intoxicated and muttering to herself. Karen had been in the cell for maybe 20 minutes when a guard approached. "Blackwood, you've got a visitor." She was escorted to a small room with a table and 2 plastic chairs. Beth sat on the far side, her face pale with exhaustion and worry. She'd clearly driven straight from Houston without stopping. Her scrubs were wrinkled, and her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "Oh, Karen," Beth said, standing up as her sister entered. "What have you done?" Karen sat down heavily, the orange jumpsuit they'd given her rustling against the plastic chair. "I messed up, Beth. I messed up bad. The charges are serious," Beth said, pulling a legal pad from her purse. "I've been on the phone with a lawyer on the drive up. David Morrison, he's a criminal defense attorney, supposed to be very good. He's agreed to take your case." "I can't afford a lawyer, Beth. I can't afford anything. That's how I got into this mess in the first place." "I'm covering it," Beth said firmly. "We'll figure out the money later. Right now, we need to focus on damage control." Karen felt tears threatening again. "Why are you helping me? After everything I've done, why are you still here?" Beth reached across the table and took Karen's hands. "Because you're my sister. Because I should have been there for you before it got to this point. Because I knew you were struggling, and I let my own pride get in the way of really helping your pride." "I offered you money," Beth said. "What I should have offered was a place to stay, a chance to start over, real support." A knock on the door interrupted them. A tall man in an expensive suit walked in carrying a briefcase. He had the kind of confident bearing that came from years of courtroom battles. "Ms. Blackwood, I'm David Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "Your sister has filled me in on the basic situation. We need to talk strategy." Karen shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip. "Mr. Morrison, I should tell you up front, guilty. I did everything they're accusing me of." Morrison nodded, unsurprised. "That's actually helpful. Tell me about your financial situation, your employment history, any extenuating circumstances." For the next hour, Karen laid out her story: the job loss, the mounting bills, the months of failed job applications, the growing desperation that had led to increasingly poor decisions. Morrison took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "The good news," he said finally, "is that you're a first-time offender with no history of violence. The bad news is that impersonating a police officer is a third-degree felony in Texas. We're looking at potential prison time." "How much time?" Beth asked. 2 to 10 years, depending on the judge and the specifics of the case. "However, the circumstances and the fact that you turned yourself in—" "I didn't turn myself in," Karen interrupted. "I was caught." "Actually, you did," Morrison said, consulting his notes. "According to the police report, you had already decided to surrender when the victims found you. You handed over the money voluntarily and cooperated fully with the arrest. That counts as turning yourself in, legally speaking." Karen thought about those final moments in the car, the conversation with Beth, the decision to drive to the police station. Maybe she had been ready to surrender, even if circumstances had forced her hand. "There's something else," Morrison continued. "They're willing to consider a plea agreement, especially if you can provide full restitution to the victims." "How much?" Karen asked. $400 to the direct victims, plus court costs and fees, probably around $1,000 total. Karen laughed bitterly. "If I had $1,000, I wouldn't be here in the first place." "I'll cover it," Beth said immediately. "Beth, no, you've already done enough. I'll cover it," Beth repeated, her voice brooking no argument. "This is what family does." Morrison gathered his papers. "I'll reach out to the prosecutor tomorrow and see what kind of deal we can work out. In the meantime, Karen, you'll likely be released on your own recognizance, given that you're not a flight risk and you've been cooperative." After Morrison left, Karen and Beth sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Beth spoke. "When you get out of here, you're coming to Houston with me." "Beth, you're coming to Houston. You're staying in my guest room, and you're going to figure out your life. No arguments." Not the desperate, grasping hope that had led her to impersonate a police officer, but something steadier, more real. "What if I can't find work in Houston either? Then we'll figure something else out together." That's what I should have said. 6 months ago, a guard appeared at the door. "Visiting hours are over." Beth stood up and hugged her sister tightly. "I'll be back tomorrow for the arraignment. Try to get some sleep." As Karen was led back to her cell, she felt lighter somehow, despite the handcuffs and the charges hanging over her head. For the first time in months, she wasn't facing her problems alone. The drunk woman was gone, replaced by an older man who was snoring loudly on the bench. Karen lay down on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring court appearances, lawyers, and the formal machinery of justice. But tonight, she had something she'd lost months ago. Someone who believed in her enough to fight for her. It wasn't the ending she'd planned when she put on that fake badge, but maybe it was the ending she needed. 3 weeks later, Karen stood in courtroom 3A of the Dallas County Criminal Courts building, her hands clasped behind her back as Judge Patricia Hernandez reviewed the plea agreement. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. Beth sat in the gallery behind her, along with David Morrison's paralegal. Karen had insisted that Beth didn't need to take another day off work to be here, but her sister had driven up from Houston anyway. "Some things are more important than work," she'd said. "Ms. Blackwood," Judge Hernandez said, looking up from the paperwork, "do you understand the terms of this plea agreement?" "Yes, Your Honor," Karen replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're pleading guilty to 1 count of impersonating a public servant, a state jail felony, and 3 counts of theft, Class A misdemeanors. The state is recommending deferred adjudication with 2 years probation, community service, and full restitution to the victims." "Do you understand what deferred adjudication means?" Morrison had explained it several times, but Karen nodded. "If I complete the probation successfully, the felony conviction will be dismissed from my record. That's correct? However, if you violate the terms of your probation, you could face up to 2 years in state jail. Are you prepared to accept these terms?" Karen thought about the past 3 weeks, the nights she'd spent in Beth's guest room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how she'd let her life spiral so far out of control. She thought about the job interviews Beth had helped her schedule, the therapy sessions Morrison had recommended, the slow process of rebuilding her sense of self. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Hernandez signed the papers with practice deficiency. "Probation will begin immediately. You'll report to Officer Sandra Williams monthly, complete 200 hours of community service, and pay restitution in the amount of $1,247. Any questions?" "No, Your Honor." "Then we're adjourned. Good luck, Ms. Blackwood." Outside the courthouse, Karen felt the Texas sun on her face for the first time as a convicted felon. It was a strange sensation, freedom that came with strings attached, a second chance that felt both generous and fragile. "How do you feel?" Morrison asked, packing his briefcase. "Relieved," Karen said, surprising herself with the honesty. "Scared, but relieved. That's normal. The hardest part is over. Now you just have to do the work." As Morrison walked away, Beth appeared at Karen's side. "So, what now?" "Now I figure out how to rebuild my life without screwing it up again." They walked to Beth's car in comfortable silence. Over the past 3 weeks, the sisters had talked more honestly than they had in years. Karen had learned that Beth's life wasn't as perfect as it appeared, that her marriage had ended 2 years ago, that she'd been struggling with her own depression, that the offer to help Karen financially had been as much about her own need to feel useful as it was about generosity. "I have something to tell you," Beth said as they reached the parking garage. "I talked to my supervisor at the hospital. They have an opening in the billing department. It's entry level, but it's steady work with benefits." Karen stopped walking. "Beth, you can't keep fixing my problems for me. I'm not fixing anything. I'm giving you information about a job opening. What you do with that information is up to you. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not ready? Then you'll figure it out. But Karen, you're not the same person who put on that fake badge. These past few weeks, watching you deal with the lawyers, the court system, the probation officer, You've handled it all with more dignity than most people could manage." Karen felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of desperation or fear. "I want to try the job. I mean, if they'll have me, they'll have you. But there's one condition." "What?" "You have to stop punishing yourself." "What?" "You did was wrong, but it doesn't define who you are. You made a mistake, you're paying for it, and now you get to move forward. But you can't move forward if you're carrying all this guilt and shame around like a backpack full of rocks." They drove back to Houston. Karen watched the Dallas skyline shrink in the rearview mirror. Somewhere in this city, Jessica Rodriguez and Michael Chen were going about their lives, probably never thinking about the fake police officer who'd taken their money. The 3 college students had their cash back and likely viewed the whole incident as a crazy story to tell at parties. But for Karen, it would always be the night that changed everything. The night she'd hit bottom and discovered that rock bottom had a trap door that could take her even lower, or a foundation strong enough to build something new. Her phone buzzed with a text message, unknown number, but this time it didn't fill her with dread. "Ms. Blackwood, this is Sandra Williams, your probation officer. Please call my office tomorrow to schedule your first check-in meeting. Looking forward to working with you." Karen showed the message to Beth, who smiled. "See? Fresh start." "Fresh start," Karen repeated, testing the words. They felt foreign, in her mouth, but not impossible. The highway stretched out ahead of them, leading away from the city where Karen had lost herself and toward whatever came next. She didn't know what her life would look like in a year, or 5 years, or 10. She didn't know if she'd succeed at the job Beth had found for her, or if she'd be able to complete her probation without stumbling. But for the first time in months, she was facing uncertainty with support instead of desperation. She had her sister beside her, a roof over her head, and a chance to prove that one terrible decision didn't have to define an entire life. Across the county line, Karen rolled down the window and let the wind blow through her hair. Behind them, Dallas faded into the distance, taking with it the woman who'd been desperate enough to impersonate a police officer. Ahead of them lay Houston and possibility, and the long, difficult work of becoming someone worth being.